I shouldn't really need to make this video, because if you're using one of the major smart home ecosystems out there, adding a Matter device should be as simple as scanning the QR code on the device and following the prompts. However, I recently threw Home Assistant into the mix in my smart home, and believe you me, getting my first Matter device set up was not a simple task. So I'm here to tell you how I overcame each one of the hurdles I faced, as none of the answers were really that easy to find. Let's look at the first issue. The first issue I faced was so unobvious it put me back for at least a week. It required answering a question so basic I'm sure you wouldn't have remotely thought of it as I didn't. That question is, how did you install Home Assistant? Yeah, that's right. The method of installation matters. Because in order to add a Matter device, it's not as simple as selecting the integration and typing in your setup code as I foolishly thought it would be. You need the Home Assistant Matter server, and the easiest way to get that is from the add-on store, which for some reason you don't get unless you've installed the full Home Assistant OS on your Home Assistant server. This little tidbit is buried in the Matter beta documentation, but if you're new to Home Assistant like myself, you may miss that or not understand what it means when you do read it. I found someone else who spelled this problem out in a forum post, luckily. So if you have Home Assistant OS on your device, great. First install the Matter server from the add-on store in settings. If not, you need to install it manually, which if you're like me and you installed Home Assistant using Docker, has a similar command line buried in a subset of those documentations I mentioned earlier, and it seems to be an even more beta setup than the Home Assistant OS method already is. But thankfully running this Docker command installed the Matter server just fine, and it now runs and allows me to connect to the Matter integration, which is great. But that's where I hit my next issue. Trying to add a Matter device from the Home Assistant web user interface didn't get me very far. I had to randomly try it from my mobile device before it did anything of use. Now this particular issue does seem to have improved recently, I think, as when I try it from the web UI now, it does direct me to say use the companion app, which means use Home Assistant app on a mobile device of some kind. And if you do it that way, it prompts you to add a Matter device using the OS's pairing process, which in my case is through Apple Home. So now you simply either scan the device's original Matter pairing code, or if you're like me and you already have that Matter device set up in that ecosystem, you need to put the device into the pairing mode using that ecosystem's app, and then get a new code which you paste in during this process. At this point, I managed to get my first device, the Govee M1 LED Strip behind me, link is on my website if you want to pick one of those up, added into Home Assistant and working great. The next challenge was that all my other Matter devices were thread-based, so I had to get thread working in Home Assistant, which is surprisingly easy if you know how. In this case, all I actually needed to do was open the companion app again on my phone and go into the thread integration and select configure. And then I hit the handy import credentials button at the bottom of the screen, which allowed Home Assistant to connect via my thread border routers on my network, which presumably includes my Apple TVs and HomePods. Once I'd done this, I could follow the exact same steps above to get my Nanoleaf Matter bulbs added. But annoyingly, on the third and final bulb, it was having real trouble getting connected. It kept telling me that it was added in the Apple Home app, but then failing to appear in Home Assistant. So I eventually realised I needed to remove the failed connections in the Apple Home app, and then try re-adding it, but this time, instead of selecting the bulb that was showing as ready to pair, I said I cannot see my device listed, and then entered the pairing code which I was given by the Apple Home app, and let it figure out which devices it needed to connect to. So great, now all of my Matter devices have been added and are working one way or another. And they're working great for about 2 days. And then all of the devices just randomly stopped working, thread and Wi-Fi devices alike. And after much searching around, I found another issue thread from someone having exactly the same problem. And one really helpful commenter asked the question, do you have any Nanoleaf devices by any chance? If so, you must update them to the latest beta firmware. Now luckily this prompted me to go and check the Nanoleaf app and find that there was indeed a brand new public firmware version available, which I installed and still no luck. Until the other person having the issue came back and reported that they'd updated their devices and had to remove and re-add them all in order for everything to start working again. So this morning I went ahead and I did just that, and added everything in the Matter integration all over again. And this brings me to something that I really quite like about Home Assistant, which is as long as you add a device and give it the same entity ID as the old one, all the existing automations and scenes and scripts just work again, without needing to recreate them. So with all of that, I now have all of my Matter devices added into Home Assistant and working again for more than 2 days. So as always, let me know if you found this video helpful. Let me know in the comments if you've run into any of these issues and this has helped you out, or if you have any different issues. I'll do my best to help you out in those comments. And as always, please consider helping the channel in any way that you can, either through the links on my website, as they are affiliate links and I will earn a small commission at no cost to you, or via my Patreon. And as always, remember, home is where the smart is.